All the anecdotal evidence suggests there's going to be a big jump. In fact, it could be a record month for EV sales in Australia, and it will certainly be a record share of the market.
Now, we know that demand for EVs can go up and down. How much has the demand for EVs gone up since the war began?
We don't know the exact data yet because the data comes out on a monthly basis, and the next lot for the month of March is not due until after April, I think. But all the anecdotal evidence suggests there's going to be a big jump. In fact, it could be a record month for EV sales in Australia, and it will certainly be a record share of the market.
So, what are your thoughts on whether the increased demand can actually be sustained?
Well, that depends on a whole bunch of things, including I think it will sustain definitely as long as the Mideast war continues and the fossil fuel supplies are threatened and the diesel and petrol prices are high. One of the things where I think this might be a breakthrough moment is that there is so much more choice for consumers now. People are just walking into EV showrooms and buying a perfectly decent electric SUV for $37,000 drive away or even less. You couldn't do that 1 or 2 years ago. We're dealing with brands which are mostly Chinese, which people probably didn't even recognize, and some of them still may not recognize. But people are having a look at these cars and they're thinking, actually, they're pretty good. I can make this leap. And one of the funny things is that, people's hesitancy towards EVs was largely dominated by range anxiety and charger anxiety. Can they get there and will be able to charge the car when they do get there, if they do get there? It was slightly overblown. In fact, it was very much overblown. Now I think we're seeing the same thing with, ironically, fossil and sort of petrol and diesel drivers who are cancelling holiday trips because they don't know that the Bowsers are going to be open, and they're also looking at the costs of that trip now, which have inflated about 50%.
Okay, so it sounds like the game is changing a little bit. There's talk of a so-called critical mass of EV demand, where new technologies tend to reach a tipping point when they reach a critical mass of public adoption. So how far away from that are we in terms of the EV market?
Well, we're not that far away actually, because we're in the early teens. In February, we had about 12% share of the market, a bit below, and that's kind of considered to be in the early majority. So if you get a tipping point like this, which sort of pushes it into the mid-teens or even the late teens, that might actually sort of keep it there or thereabouts. I mean, it will be up and down over a while, but that could actually just tip it. And then you just see other people looking at EVs, becoming more familiar with them, more models coming in, prices coming down, and maybe that will be the tipping point that we've been waiting for quite a long time in Australia, because it's been stuck around 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 for a couple of years now for a bunch of different reasons. But this could be it.
Now, there have been reports that the government is looking at introducing a road user charge for EVs. How damaging would that be for EV sales and demand?
It's hard to tell. I think it will be unfortunate, and it really depends when and how it is introduced. I think the EV industry understands that it's inevitable, but they want it to be introduced fairly. And I think they argue that all cars should be subject to an EV road tax. At the moment, the fuel excise revenue goes into general revenue, as does, the revenue raised from GST sales from EVs. So there really is a thought now that it should be evenly passed, and not just sort of, not just a reason to sort of raise revenue cheaply and to penalise EVs, but to encourage a fair market going forward. Because, with the decline of petrol and diesel cars, then obviously something needs to replace that excise tax.
Now, moving to international policy, under a new trade deal with the European Union, a 5% tariff on the import value of EV cars will be scrapped. Now, could that provide a further tailwind for EV demand?
Look, I'll give it a bit of a fillip, but the European car makers haven't really been making that many inroads into the EV market in Australia. They've been outcompeted by the Chinese. 5% may inspire some of them to send more cars here. It may help them compete with some of the Chinese EV makers, but I don't think it's going to make a shattering difference. I think the competition with the EV makers in China, and the issue in Australia with the petrol prices, I think is going to be dominant.
Giles Parkinson, a Treasury review of the EV tax breaks was launched in mid-December of last year, obviously. Now, heading into the May budget, a big budget, What can we expect? Cutting the tax breaks altogether, phasing them out, or reducing the current price threshold?
Well, nothing too dramatic, I hope, because that could be the sort of the breaker that breaks this this sudden interest in EVs. Look, there is a lot of pressure on the government to sort of contain revenues and balance the budget and cut spending here and there. Look, something nicely calibrated would be a good idea. There are arguments, strong arguments coming that they've been over generous to parts of the population, but it has supported a key important market, and I think it just underlines now just how important it is to have security, energy security for vehicles in Australia. We can't rely on imported fuels. Um, the more we can do to encourage people to be able to charge their cars at home with the electricity that we produce in our own grid, I just think is fundamental.
Yeah, and it's clearly a rapidly changing market. Giles Parkinson, thank you so much for joining the business.
Well, thanks for having me.